What is your I'm an a-hole moment? So I meet this lady and I ask her, what's your name? And she says, Shara. And me, trying to be playful, I say, oh, cool, like Sarah with a lisp. And she says, I have a lisp. My name is Sarah. And I go, oh, sorry. Next story. I was in the army making fun of a guy, said he couldn't even get a medal for something in the Special Olympics. He then pointed out his daughter was in the Special Olympics. And I profusely apologized and he accepted, but it still keeps me awake at night. Next story. I developed a pretty serious drinking problem, and in one day, everyone finally had enough. I got fired, kicked out of my apartment, disowned by my friends and family. I was left utterly alone and homeless with $2,000 in a 1986 Volvo station wagon. It was coordinated between everyone in my life, and it effing hurt. But I wouldn't take any of it back for the world. Things are far better now, but that was the sort of life event that is supposed to change you, and I let it do so for the better. Next story. In early high school, late 90s, so if you got a girl's number, it was the house number. I called up a girl's house and her dad answered. She was out, but I noticed his speech was a bit slow and slurred. Next day at school, I mentioned I had called and asked if her dad had been drinking. Well, turns out he didn't drink much since his stroke. Still feel awful about that one. Next story. 8th grade speech class. I had a kid who had been absent for a few days, and when he came back, I started raising him a bit. We were friendly, but not friends, so I felt okay kidding around, claiming he was just pretending to get sick to be out of class, that sort of thing. Nothing really mean, though. Well, he took it for a bit, then turned, looked me dead in the eyes, and said in the flattest voice, "No, my mother died," and turned back around. And if God had struck me dead with a bolt of lightning when I stood before him at the pearly gates, I'd have said, yeah, fair enough. Edit. This happened about 35 years ago for me, so while it doesn't keep me up at night, it's one of those little reminders to maybe not treat everything as an opportunity for joking. A little personal growth, you know? But as a bit of an epilogue, I went to my 30th high school reunion, and who should be there but dead mom guy from speech class. We actually hung out and talked a while. His wife and I got along great. We're Facebook friends, and he seems like a pretty cool guy. But I bet you can all guess what memory I have not and will not be bringing up ever. Next story. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years came up to me and started telling me about how they haven't been doing that good lately, and that they found out they have cancer. Well, I was at work and only paying half attention, so after he stopped talking, I said, "That's good. Haven't seen him since." Next story. Years ago, I went into a Hot Topic and I was at the register. The girl working started telling me about all of the new Metallica shirts that they had gotten. For some reason, I told her I wasn't really into wearing band shirts anymore, which was mostly true, and even though I didn't mean to, it came out sounding really snobbish. At the time, I thought her reaction was kinda strange, even accounting for my accidental condescending behavior. Shortly after I left the store, and I remembered I was wearing a NIN shirt. 9-inch nails. That's what NIN stands for. I just got that. He didn't spell it out, but I just got that. But anyway, next story. So I told my friend that she shouldn't use medication for her mental illness because I was convinced she could just use sheer willpower to get through it. It was an a-hole move to make her second guess getting professional help to address her mental health issues. I wish I just instead offered support instead of trying to fix it when she mentioned the side effects. When I had no idea what I was talking about, this was when I was a teenager and thought I knew everything. Edit. Just wanted to add that I offered we face it together, that we should find the root of why she felt so anxious, depressed, and we'd squash it. I thought that medication was a temporary thing and wouldn't help in the long term. Yet, the assistance of a 16-year-old with no medical license could? I just didn't want my friend to suffer, but it was so wrong to try to substitute a medical professional. Next story. My friend group tried to stay close after high school, but we all fell out of touch as you do as everyone forged their own path in life. Well, mine led me down a path of depression, anxiety, and failure. So every year or so, they would get a get-together to reconnect and hang out, and I attended a couple of these. But as time went on and my downward spiral got worse, I stopped responding to calls, texts, invites, etc. because I thought that no one would want to hang out with this version of me. I was invited to 2 weddings though, which I didn't even respond to because of this negative loop. And then when my best friend from that group was diagnosed with cancer, I couldn't even bring myself to face him. I tried to go to his funeral but couldn't enter the building because I felt that I didn't deserve to be there. Finally, a few months ago, the parents of one of my friends saw me at work and wanted to talk to me. They told me that my friend group was really broken up, that I ignored all of their attempts to reach out to me. It was then that I realized that in all of my stress about being miserable to be around, I had become an a-hole to those who had tried to care about me. Next story. When I was 16, I worked in a retail store and I was in charge of the fitting room. You see people come in and out so much that you sometimes pay too close attention. A woman walked in with their preteen kid, so I pointed towards the ladies' side. I only side glanced and saw her kid was wearing a baseball cap with their head lowered and really baggy clothes. So I immediately assumed the kid was a boy and pointed towards the men's side. They looked super awkward and uncomfortable before their mother corrected me and said, "She's my daughter." I apologized profusely, and then their mom decided to nag her by saying, "See, with the clothes you wear, people think you're a boy." I felt even more terrible that I put her in this weird conversation with her mom. Edit. For anyone wondering, this happened in 2007 in New England. Back then, non-binary wasn't exactly discussed or regularly talked about amongst teenagers, so at 16, I definitely panicked because I didn't want to offend customers and possibly get fired. If this had happened today, I probably wouldn't have said anything at all and just pointed in whichever direction they'd like to go. Good to know we can all agree that the mother was the real Wang in this situation. Next story. One day while I was walking on the street, some kids kicked a ball in my direction. I was going to pass it back, but I thought one of the kids closer would just get it. I decided to keep walking, and I looked back at the kid and I could see the look of disappointment on his face, and I felt like the biggest a-hole on the planet for a few days. I still feel bad thinking about it. Next story. A lady told me she was hospitalized for months after she fell asleep at the wheel and her car drove off of a cliff. She said she woke up right when the wheels went over, and I asked her, was it worth it? And she stared at me, wondering what I meant, so I continued, "Now that you know what it's like to fly in a car." All right, y'all, so OP had an opportunity to clarify himself or say, "Oh, I misspoke," or like go in a different way, like, "Oh, maybe you value life now." But OP decided to put the feet on the gas and keep going. She drove off a literal cliff and then he drove off of a proverbial one. You could have stopped yourself. Anyway, next story. So about 20 years ago, I had some friends over for a party. At some point, a girl spilled her drink all over my keyboard and all the keys got stuck and it didn't work. Somehow I got irrationally angry. She tried to apologize, but I judged the effort too feeble. I tried to clean the keyboard, swearing aloud, which made her miserable, and I finally slapped a big out of order notice on the keyboard right next to her. She got effed up and left, walking in the snow to her home 5 kilometers, 3.1 freedom units away. When my friends just stared at me silently, I realized how big of an a-hole I was. I ran after her and got her to return. And we've been married for 9 years now. Next story. Teacher here walked into my coworker's classroom loudly and obnoxiously, mocking a man from the district who is supposed to help us with instruction and provide support. Well, she ushers me out of her room immediately and starts laughing because he was sitting in there to observe her next class. Next story. I rang and I paid for a mowing service, and when the guy rolled up, I started telling him that I can't mow the lawn myself anymore as my injured ankle would play up and hurt for the rest of the day. Then he got out of the car and I realized he was an amputee from the knee down. Next story. I beat the actual crap out of a kid who was a grade below and about a foot shorter than me in middle school because he hit my sister. Granted, he was a little a-hole, but I held him against the wall and punched him in the nose until he was bleeding everywhere. That's when I learned I have anger issues. Next story. When my son was about 3 months old, I was walking out with him in his stroller. My anxiety, it was high, and I had pretty bad postpartum depression. Then, this kid on a skateboard was skating towards us. He was maybe 12 or 13, and he was skating like he was just going past us, and he was going really fast. Well, he came within inches of the stroller, just flying. If he had lost control, he would have crashed right into my newborn. Once he got barely past me, I spun around, locked eyes with him, and growled, "MFer!" And I'll never forget the shocked look on that kid's face. He had meant no harm by it. I cried when I got home and I felt horrible. This was like 8.5 years ago. Kid, if you're reading this, little skateboarding kid, I'm really sorry. Next story. I grew up fairly poor, and as a kid, the concept of money, it didn't mean much to me. I just knew that we had less things than the other kids in my class. So when the Nintendo started getting super popular, I asked my mom for one. She obviously refused since we couldn't afford it, but apparently later on that evening, I had drawn a picture of a Nintendo along with a comic strip of me and my mom playing a game on it together. Apparently, she had stayed up that entire night crying because she had felt guilty about not being able to afford it, as my dad told me years later. Next story. At his graduation, a friend of mine was a foreign exchange student from Italy, and her parents were at the ceremony. I went up to them and just shouted, "Hi, I love Italians!" I don't know why, but I just felt like a douchebag in that moment. Next story. My buddy wanted to set me up with a new coworker of his. I got to his apartment early and started getting drunk with his roommate. He called and said they were going to be late. And he said, "She's a bigger girl. Don't mention her weight." And he had told me this previously as well. And by the time they showed up, I was pretty drunk and I wanted to make a good impression. So I said, "You're not nearly as fat as they said you were." She turned around and fled. Next story. At the movies once, it was just me and friends and one other group sitting in front. There was a guy in front that kept slurring on an icy really loudly. Like he just really wanted to get every last drop. After a few minutes, I got really agitated and made a super obnoxious and loud slurping sound to make them aware that it was annoying me. And literally, as soon as I did it, I saw that it was a disabled man and his parents, and he had a suction tube. I was so ashamed. I walked out of the theater quietly whispering to them, "I'm so sorry," and I never went back in. Next story. I was running a bit late for work one afternoon, and traffic was oddly heavy for a part of the drive. All these cars were driving like 15 under the speed limit. As soon as the road opened to 2 lanes, I slammed on the gas pedal and flew around this ridiculously slow line of cars, until I got to the car in the front driving so slow and realized it wasn't just some slow a-hole, it was a hearse, and I just flew past a funeral procession. However, in my defense, everyone I'd seen before had their hazards on and little flags on each car so this sort of thing doesn't happen, but I felt awful. Y'all, I remember one time I was in the car with my dad and sister, and we were going somewhere, and we were going on to the road that leads to like the main road, like the kind of highway. And anyway, as we're just about to go, we're the first cars, the light turns green and a cop rolls up, and we're like, "What the hell?" And then there's a cop on the opposite side of the almost highway, and we're like, "What the hell?" And then the cop thankfully comes up to us and not everybody else sitting behind us, which there are multiple cars. And my dad's like, "What's going on?" And the guy's like, "Oh, we got a funeral procession going on." So we're there for like 10-15 minutes waiting for this funeral procession for apparently the chief of police who had died, or the former fire chief who had died. And I know funeral processions are a thing, but I just never experienced such a grand one before that had so many vehicles and made us wait so long and took up the entire not highway. But yeah, that was a really peculiar experience. But anyway, next story. So I used to tend bar. I was very busy at a freestanding bar one time. I was literally surrounded, and I went to wait on the next customer. I made eye contact and asked what I could get him as I turned to throw something away. He gave no response. I asked again as I started wiping up a spot someone had vacated. No response. This kept going on a couple of more times. As customers were building up, I turned with a bit of an attitude and said something to the effect of, "Sir, I'm getting deeper in the weeds and all of these other people are getting pissed. You need to order or move aside so others can." He then informed me that he was deaf, and as I kept turning away, he couldn't read my lips. Oh, F. I am an a-hole. Next story. My dad's a prankster, and whenever we complained about his jokes, he would always say, "But after I die, you will miss my jokes." So one time, he was acting dumb, and I was tired of him and told him to stop, and he began to say, "But after I die," and I replied, "Everyone will be happy." He went silent, and he looked hurt. Not my proudest moment. Edit. Whoa, a lot of comments. Sorry for not replying to all of you. I'll try to sum up all of my answers here. My relationship with my dad's not the best ever since I was a child. Also not the worst compared to other stories on Reddit. Many of his jokes consisted of making fun of people, including me, specifically how I dressed and that I was a weirdo since an early age. I was around 10 when this happened, and I haven't apologized, and I should, and I will probably do it. Unfortunately, he indeed was hurt by my response, but that didn't stop him to continue being a prankster. I believe I have matured, and now I'm way more careful to what I say to him and the people I care about. We are still working on our relationship and are trying to become closer, but I doubt we will ever be 100% close because we have said and done hurtful things to each other throughout the years. I hope everyone has a better and more loving relationship with your parents. Next story. My best friend asked me to pull into a Burger King drive-thru. It was really late and I was positive they were closed, but he was sure they were open. I pulled up to the speakers and yelled, "F you, suck my fat white ding-dong" at the top of my lungs. Looked at my friend and went, "See, they're closed." And then I heard someone starting to say something on the intercom and I spat out. Next story. Vegas. Second to last row for a Blue Man Group show. The people behind us were talking loudly the entire show. They were basically giving a play-by-play of everything going on. We shushed and glared repeatedly to no avail. By the end of the show, we were so mad that we were going to throw some harsh words their way. The lights come up, we turn around, and there was a group of people and their obvious chaperones. This was a group of blind people. Many of them had no eyes. We slipped away feeling just awful about our behavior. We really should have apologized. Next story. Okay, so my husband and I, when we first started dating, went to a super fancy restaurant. One that at the end of your meal takes your plate, boxes your leftovers for you, and brings it out in a bag. A few nights later, we went to another restaurant. Not as fancy. We were lost in conversation when the waiter came over to ask if we needed boxes for our leftovers. Me, completely not thinking, lifted up my plate to hand it to him, thinking he was there to take it, box it up, and bring it back. Not that kind of restaurant, though. Definitely one that would bring you a styrofoam container so that you can pack up your own crap. And this poor waiter, so kind and confused, took my plate and walked back to the back room. He brought it out a few minutes later, nicely boxed up, and my husband, my new boyfriend at the time, was shocked, like, what kind of an a-hole am I dating? And I stopped mid-sentence and stared at my a-holery, and then it dawned on me what I had done. I've never been more embarrassed, and to this day, I still wonder if the guy spit in my food. Next story. I had an incident a few years ago. I was heavy. I still am, but less so today, thank God. But I was in the car with my mom, and I was waiting for this semi-overweight lady to walk across the street. And as she's walking the street, I absent-mindedly say, "Get a move on, you land whale." And my mom turns to me and says, "Look who's talking, she's thinner than you." And you know you're fat when your mom doesn't let you make fat jokes anymore. Next story. When I was in high school, my friends and I used to put together these scavenger hunts where instead of finding things, people had to do things. We were inspired by Viva La Bam, and it was mostly pretty dumb stuff like 6 raw eggs, chug milk, argue with a street sign for 5 minutes, etc. Anyway, one day we had a hunt planned, but it started raining, so we went into the Watertown place in downtown Chicago to wait it out, and while there, we got the idea to play a giant game of tag since we couldn't do the scavenger hunt. There were about 10 of us total, just chasing each other around throughout all of the stores and floors, and we were having a blast. About 15 to 20 minutes into the game, me and a couple of other people that were around me got stopped by a security guard. They were kicking us out for what we were doing. This was pretty serious, like they had a guard on every floor looking for us. And one of the rules of the hunt was everything you did needed to be documented in some way. So I had a digital camera on me. This was way back before everyone had the means to record on them like we do now with smartphones, and the security guard had no idea I was videotaping him as he escorted us out. And here is the video of that. We all, of course, thought it was hilarious and a bit unfair that we were being kicked out for having a little fun. But fast forward to years later, and I'm working as a cashier at Borders. A couple of little kids start chasing each other in the store and end up knocking over a display. I had to go and clean it while these kids ran away laughing, which annoyed me. It was then that it hit me, holy crap, we were being such a-holes. We had definitely knocked over quite a bit of displays that day, which was part of the reason they had security guards escort us out, and we were probably such a huge pain in the ass to a lot of people that day. But we just didn't see it that way because we were dumb teenagers. Next story. I met with a friend and casually asked her about if she's planning to have kids. Mind you, I'm a new mom of 2, staying at home, and kids are basically my life now, and most of my friends are parents. She wasn't yet, so I casually asked, to which she rightfully replied, "You know, that's a Wang question, do you? And I'm never asking this again. I'm very, very sorry." Next story. A few hours after I learned a guy's wife had passed away, I had a bit too much to drink and I quoted the worst possible line from The Office that I could have quoted at that time. "I'm gonna dig up Scarn's dead wife and I'm gonna hump her real good." The realization hit me as soon as the words left my mouth. He was cool about it, but it still keeps me up at night sometimes. Next story. Was flirting with this woman at a friend's gathering, and towards the end of the night, I realized all I wanted was to sleep with her, but gave her the impression I liked her. I was never a one-night stand kind of guy, so I effed right off and then never spoke to her again. Double a-hole. Next story. My best friend and I, we got insanely drunk. We were both good people and avoid drama, but she started this massive argument about what direction my house was in and would not let it go. I told her over and over for 20 minutes I'm not going to engage in this, that she needed to stop, that I didn't care what direction my house was in. Uber didn't need to know. And then, a few weeks later, after she hadn't spoken to me, I assumed she was in the honeymoon phase with her new boyfriend, which is normal for her, our mutual friend said she's been saying I hit her in the face and head. And so my instinct was to say, of course, I would never hit someone, let alone somewhere like their face, but I remember being frustrated enough that slapping the idiot out of her might have been what I was aiming for. Next story. I really wanted my coworker to get fired, and even listed off all of the things she was doing that were concerning to my supervisor. The biggest complaint was her alcohol problem. She even showed up drunk once to work, and this was because she was sort of in a downward spiral. Well, I was kind of upset when she wasn't fired and was talked to about getting help instead. I worked with her the most, or I would have cared less. I'm sort of biased towards alcoholics because of past abuse, and now I have the realization that I was being unreasonably hateful towards her. Next story. I was super young, maybe 6, so I probably shouldn't still be beating myself up over it, but the thing I always go back to as a point of humility is the time I was disappointed in the puzzle I got as a Christmas present because I was expecting more from my grandpa and started crying. I didn't even really mean to and wasn't making a scene out of it. I just got my hopes up a lot and started blabbering when they didn't meet expectations. When he noticed, we ended up doing the puzzle together and I had a pretty good time, so I was upset over nothing. He passed away about 2 weeks ago, so it's been on my mind a lot. Next story. About 20 years ago, I worked at Mickey D's. I'd maxed out my 5 stars and progressed to the heady heights of staff trainer. So, training a new lad on the drive-thru when this bottle-blonde, adult star-looking woman comes through with the roof down on her BMW. I say to the new kid, wonder how much wank she had to suck to pay for that car and those boobs. Turns out, it's his mom coming through to see her baby boy on his first day at work. Okay, so this is a small pet peeve of mine, but you didn't want to tell us what happened afterwards? What the employee's reaction was? Was there some drama? Was he like chill about it? Did the employee say, nah, yeah, my mom's pretty hot? And then OP looked at him like, wait, what? I don't know. Give us more. I hate when stories end halfway through. But anyway, next story. So, a friend of mine had openly told me repeatedly they were in love with me. I was in a very unstable period in my life and extremely should not have been in a relationship. The friend was also not innocent here and definitely did not expect my rejections for months. But one night, while I was very drunk, they brought it up again. And in that state, I agreed to try. Oof, you can't try a relationship with someone if you're not quite certain you don't have feelings for them, and they're quite certain they're in love with you. I effed up, and I hurt him bad. Next story. Wife and I went to Starbucks in an affluent adjacent town. We got up to the drive-thru window, and the guy says, oh, the car before you paid for your coffee. You're all set. And I kind of froze up because I was in that awkward, well, do I pay it forward? Is it required? What if the person behind me ordered like $40 worth of crap? So that was my first pay it forward experience, and I just drove off with my free coffee. I guess next time I'll keep the chain going or whatever. Next story. So I was traveling on a bus and a girl came on and stood in the platforming area, holding the rail right in front of me. She had this 3D kind of looking glittery gold effect on her nails. Well, I turned to my then girlfriend who was sitting next to me and said something to the effect of, well, those are some ugly nails. Then the girl shot the hand to her body and disembarked on the next stop. My first thought was, oh crap, she heard me. And then the guilt came. She probably saw it somewhere and thought it looked cool, and she was so stoked when she found out she could get it done. And then she was so happy when it turned out perfectly. It was definitely done great, I just didn't like it. And then piece of crap me comes and ruins her day. It still keeps me up at night. Glitter nails girl, if you're out there, I am so sorry. Next story. Everyone I knew were a-holes, so I moved across the country to get away from them. But everyone in the West were a-holes too, so I moved back home, then back west, then east, and then west. Did this yearly for 4 or 5 years. That is when the realization that everything is relative and maybe I was the a-hole instead began being a little more empathetic and things started to get better. Next story. I was behind a great big truck at a gas station. They stopped at the first pump rather than pulling through to the second pump. I couldn't even squeeze around their vehicle because it was huge. This meant I had to circle around and back up to the pump and then in front of them. So I got out and said a few annoyed words to the teenage driver. Dude, ever hear of should pull through? I was behind you and I just had to circle around. Then the teenage driver pointed out he'd stopped at only the diesel pump at the station and drove a diesel. Well then, next story. When I was a kid, we were on a field trip somewhere and I saw someone with cerebral palsy using canes to help them walk. I didn't know anything was wrong with them and I just thought they were walking funny, so I started imitating them to make my friends laugh. My teacher came over and pulled me aside and explained to me that they had a disability and it wasn't okay for me to do that. I still didn't completely understand at that point, I just knew that it was wrong. I didn't understand how bad what I was doing was until I was much older, and I still feel like an a-hole about it now, especially since it's possible that they might have seen or heard me. Next story. I was driving home from a job I hated, where I was treated very poorly. The best way home was also frequented by people trying to reach the interstate from downtown, and were thus not familiar with some of the quirks of that particular street. I was almost always on edge while on my way home though. So, one day, there was a guy riding a recumbent bicycle very slowly and well out of the bike lane. As soon as it was safe to pass him, I rolled down my window and I called him an a-hole. Upon doing so, I recognized him as a friend of my parents, a guy I knew pretty well and who is objectively an incredibly good guy. I knew then that the a-hole was me. Next story. While hungover at a breakfast diner, the waitress asked me if I wanted a box for my food. I said sure, and she asked me what size of box I needed. And without thinking, I say, I don't know, I'm not a box expert. Immediately felt like an a-hole after that. Next story. Okay, so once I was shadowing a coworker to learn a new job. He was probably 20 years older, but seemed nice enough. One day, his desk phone was ringing, so I yelled across the room to tell him, and he shouted back and said for me to answer it. Hello? Female caller on the other end sounded like she was pretending to be mentally handicapped. In a really slow voice, she said, "Is John there?" And I let out a little laugh and replied back in the same voice, "Yeah, hold on a second." It was a rowdy office, and I was in my early 20s at the time. I figured someone on the other end of the line was goofing off. I sounded like the cliche a-hole kid on the playground calling his friends disabled or something of that nature. When I handed the phone off to John, he asked who it was. And I said, I don't know, but someone who's acting R-worded. Turns out it was his wife, who had some physical disabilities from bad anesthesia that caused a stroke. I felt like the world's biggest a-hole that day. Next story. A few years ago, I was in college. Every day I had to take a train up to get there. Public transport where I live isn't very great. A lot of delays, no-shows, etc. One day, I slept in though, and because of that, I was in a hurry. I got on the train, but one stop before I had to get off, the train stopped. I was pissed off and started complaining to other passengers. We were agreeing how the train company couldn't do anything right. Another delay, how are we going to get to work or school? And after about 20 minutes, they finally told us why the train stopped. Someone had thrown themselves in front of the train and died. The whole train went silent. A few minutes after the announcement, we were escorted out. I remember seeing the train driver sitting on a bench, completely defeated. I realized that lives were destroyed and I was complaining about being late for school. My heart still aches when I think about it. Next story. In my junior year of college, I was working on a team project with a classmate who was a senior. I was supposed to turn in the project to our professor, but apparently I forgot, and this caused us to get an F for the project, until I turned it in later and he could give us an actual grade. Unfortunately, this temporary F caused my teammate to fail the course, and for whatever reason, this prevented him from graduating. So he had to graduate a quarter later. Next story. Some 31-year-old out there is reading this and suddenly remembering the time he made fun of his 10-year-old classmate about her dad and didn't believe her when she repeatedly told him that her dad died a couple of years prior. I'm answering for you, Joel, and you're an a-hole. Next story. When I was about 14, me and my buddy walked by a girl from my neighborhood and she said, "Hey boys," and we kept walking and I said something like, "What an ugly B-word." There wasn't even something wrong with her, I was just trying to be edgy, I guess. And I regret this so much to this day. I'd still really like to apologize to her. I'm so ashamed. I'm hesitant to even post this here, but hey, OP asked for crap like this. Next story. Last year at my wife's Thanksgiving, her brother invited a friend along so she wouldn't be alone on Thanksgiving. Trying to make her feel welcome, I asked her a few questions about herself at dinner. I asked, "Where are you from?" She responded that she was from my hometown. I said, "Oh, cool. Did you go to my high school?" And she answered, "Yeah." And I said, "Wow, what year did you graduate?" And then she set down her fork and looked directly at me and said, "The same year as you. We had several classes together. I sat behind you in driver's ed." And on that day, I was the a-hole. Next story. When I think I have the moral high ground, which is often subjective anyway, I sometimes ask myself, how much money, power, etc. would it take for me to do the thing that I disapprove of? I feel like a hypocritical jerk whenever I realize that I am basically for sale. It's a morally strange sentiment, feeling strongly about something and still realizing that if the counter offer would be high enough, I wouldn't care so much anymore. Next story. Alright, so my brother is legally blind, so he has friends that are totally blind, one of which is his girlfriend. He brings her over to meet the fam, and I notice she has two purses, one blue and one black. She explained upon me inquiring in conversation that two purses allow her to separate her things and she can feel the buckle in the purse and know exactly what's in it. So, about an hour later or so, she mentioned she needs her purse, to which I responded without thinking, which one? The blue or the black one? The room went silent, and I thought exactly, oh man, I'm such an a-hole. Opie's not intentionally being rude. That's just like, I would feel guilty about it too, but does she have a sense of humor about it? Sometimes people do. You know, if you own up to it, why not? Oh, I'm sorry, Marianne. How foolish of me. I'm such a huge and she's like, oh, it's fine, hee giggle, and we could look back and laugh. Honestly, I'd probably make the same mistake myself. But anyway, next story. So, I was waiting for my Amtrak train to arrive in Washington, D.C., and the line was really long. Although I had taken this trip many times and always waited politely in line each time, on this day I convinced myself that because every seat was reserved, we all had seats on this train, and therefore the line didn't matter. So I walked up towards the front of the line and planned to just cut in line once the train arrived. The people waiting in line saw what I was doing and firmly put me in my place. And as well, they should. So I boarded dead last, as I should. It was a Wang move made worse by my idiotic rationalization. Next story. About 6 months ago, a 14-year-old kid on a bike flipped me off. I told him to F off, and he came over on his bike and kept giving me the middle finger. I totally lost it and gave him a face-palm face slap that both knocked him off of his bike, and I'm sure I knocked him out. I'm 15 stone. He was probably 7 stone soaking wet. Never felt so bad in a long time. Next story. I was stuck on the tube on the way to the O2 Arena when someone clatters something onto my shin. It wasn't that it hurt, but the carriage was way too cozy for comfort, and I was sardined and frustrated, so my instantaneous reaction was to yell, "Oi, watch it!" And then I turned to see the inconsiderate person to further emphasize my point, only to see the most innocent-looking, visually impaired girl with her walking stick. I apologized straight away, but to this day, I cringe at what an absolute tool I was for that split second. Next story. Alright, so it actually happened last night. I was with a girl, we had both been drinking, and she's vegan. I was explaining how I'm not judgmental and I would never think I'm above anyone else because I hold different beliefs. Like, I believe in God. I wouldn't ever argue my sentiment over an atheist because the hell am I to tell someone how to live or what to hold dear, right? Anyways, I'm explaining that I have a very sarcastic sense of humor, and when I'm with someone who holds some convictions that make them believe they're better than someone, for instance like a diehard feminist or moral vegans, and they bring it up, I immediately start cracking jokes and acting exactly how they don't want me to be. And because to me, it's hilarious that anyone could just be so judgy to others. Anyways, as I'm explaining this, I realize, oh crap, I'm an a-hole. I'm literally making fun of someone for their personal convictions. And while I may not be doing it with any sort of malintent, they probably don't appreciate the sentiment. Anyways, I'm not going to make those jokes anymore, cause it's a crappy thing to do. Next story. I treated the woman I loved like crap for a year and a half. Took her for granted, refused to face my own insecurities and internal frustrations in a healthy manner, and took it out on her by lashing out, overcompensated for my own self-loathing by convincing myself her greatest strengths were weaknesses to be ashamed of, and never gave her the love she deserved. I didn't hold her hand, didn't tell her I love her, didn't kiss her, didn't compliment her, didn't love her like I should have. When I moved out of her place, in a manner that I'll be ashamed of until the day I die, no matter how sweetly and and kindly she forgives me, I got a job at a store where a coworker lost her crap on me for a stupid misunderstanding. And I mean, it was an effing stupid misunderstanding. And this woman lost her damn mind over it instead of being mature, handling her misplaced emotions like an adult, and talking about things instead of just lashing out. And all I could do was just keep my mouth closed and let that insane, irrational, completely unjustified anger flow around me, because it wasn't coming from a place where I could reason with it. And then, a few nights later, it just effing hit me. It just hit me. I had been that person with my girlfriend. I had been the insane, irrational, furious, insensitive, immature, insecure lunatic with my girlfriend. And she had been forced to let my rage and vitriol and venom born of my own insecurities and inwardly directed fury just flow around her and stay silent because it wasn't coming from a rational or logical place. It was all insane. That epiphany hit me like a ton of effing bricks. I mean, I never knew an intangible realization could almost have weight to it. It struck me so hard. I could only think 6 words over and over again in my head for what felt like an eternity. Oh God, what have I done? This woman is the most incredible human being I've ever met in my life. The most forgiving, kind, gentle, and loving woman I've ever known. She stuck with me, despite all of my anger and my emotional violence, because she saw potential in me to be a better person. She gambled on that for a year and a half. She had actually given up by the time I left, though. She was looking for a way to completely sever ties, to not even have me in her life as a friend. My apology? It came too late to save our relationship, but it came just in time for me to save our friendship. I would do anything for her. I spent a year and a half pouring gas on this bridge and doing everything I could to burn it, and I'm going to do everything I can to build it back stronger and healthier than ever before. I love her endlessly, a million billion times more than I could ever voice aloud, and I'm grateful that my almost too late, oh crap, I'm an a-hole moment came just in time to prove to her that she didn't waste her time after all. She made me a better person, and for that, I'll never be able to thank her properly. Next story. Alright, so, a bit of background here. My cousin had an immature, cheating piece of crap wife, and I was happy that they were finally getting a divorce. My mom was talking to my cousin on the phone and trying to uplift him in any way possible. Well, she had the phone on speaker, and when I found out who she was talking to, my dumbass, without thinking, said, "Congrats on the divorce." I already know I'm a sarcastic a-hole, guys, but I never thought I would say that, out loud at least. Alright, y'all, so I want to address the second to last story. What an incredible story. I'm so glad that OP decided to put that out there. Just an incredible piece of writing and self-awareness. So I really appreciate OP sharing that story. And, you know, there's 1 or 2, maybe 3 people in my life who I wish they had those same epiphanies. And I'm sure all of you know 1, 2, or 3 people or more people in your life who maybe you wish had those same epiphanies. But if we can take away and learn anything from here is that self-awareness is not dead and life is like poetry sometimes. It rhymes. George Lucas said that, I believe. But also, he made Jar Jar Binks, so let's not take everything he says as gospel, okay? But anyway, guys, we're at the end of the video. This was a fun one. Thank you all so much for watching, commenting, have a really good day, and bye!